Hello everybody and welcome to the latest episode of the Dome Runners. I am your host Crimson Oracle, and today we're going to be talking about a topic that comes up probably, once a month, a couple times a month for me interacting with people on social media, which is the issue of how much it costs to get into Necromunda. It's a complicated topic that I think really depends a lot on what you're looking to get out of the game. But I have noticed that people who come at the game from the perspective of Warhammer 40,000 tend to have, I guess, a mistaken impression of what it actually takes to play a game of Necromunda and what you really need. And as a result, I think that there's this sort of idea that in order to play Necromunda, you have to somehow buy every single book. And that couldn't be further from the truth. And I think that I know where this mistake or misimpression comes from, and so we're going to get into that in this video. But first, I do want to mention that, as you can see, I've rearranged things in my basement, and now my microphone is, it's still attached to my desk, which is now facing this lovely wall of models behind me, and of course my 3D printers and stuff in back, my airbrush booth with unnecessary RGB lighting, which I actually really like as a backdrop, so I'm sticking with it. And I am really trying to kind of make a go at this making YouTube content on a regular basis stuff, and it's a lot of work to kind of get into the groove, but I have really been enjoying it. And I just wanted to thank everyone and say, of course, like and subscribe in order to keep the content coming. I am well on my way to my goal, which is to get to 1,000 subscribers by the end of this year. I don't know if I'm actually going to be able to do it or not, but we're at the quarter point of the year, and I'm right at the quarter point of 1,000 followers or subscribers, so we'll see. So don't forget to like and subscribe, and let's get into the topic. Necromunda. How much does it really cost? So, when you're talking about the entry-level cost of a game, it really kind of depends on what you're doing with it. Now, obviously, Necromunda, like most games, has a starter set, and you could purchase that, but I think that it's important to start a little bit back from that, because we can get into the starter set in a little bit once we understand what you need to play your game. So in order to play a game of Necromunda, you need a few things. You need the core rules of the game. You need the rules for your gang. You need your models. You need the dice that you're going to roll. You need tactics cards. You may need tokens. And you need a space to play. And that, in essence, is everything you need to play Necromunda. But how do you get all of it? So the first thing that you're going to need is the game's core rules. Unfortunately, Games Workshop recently increased prices again, and now the Necromunda rulebook is $60, which is, I think, way, way more than any book is worth. I don't understand how publishers get away charging so much for physical books. Games Workshop is completely insane about physical books. They are forcing you to buy physical books in order to play Warhammer 40,000, and even Kill Team, which is just like, I can't fathom why anyone would ever use a physical book to play a game when you can have everything searchable and easily accessible in a digital document. Why would anyone use a physical book? It's worse in every single way, other than the fact that it doesn't run out of batteries. And, who runs out of batteries now with 20-watt phone chargers? You know what I'm saying? I'm just kidding. I love my friends with ADHD, so shout out to you guys. And I really don't know why it is that they've done this, but what's cool about Necromunda is that it's one of the few remaining games where you can still get all your rules digitally. So Games Workshop sells on Warhammer Digital the Necromunda core rulebook, and it is going for the very reasonable price of $40. So you could be playing Necromunda for the cost of the $40 rulebook plus the cost of buying your factions rules. And good news, the factions rules are also available digitally. Unfortunately, it's a little bit complicated to talk about which rules you need, because there are, of course, a bunch of different gangs, and they each have a different rule book that their rules are located in. But in general, you're going to spend around $40 for the digital version of those rules as well. So that means that the entry-level cost to have all the rules you need is about $80, which is, not an insignificant amount of money, but it is worth noting that you really only need one rule book. You don't really need multiple rule books for your group. In my experience, the game's basic mechanics aren't that complicated, and it doesn't take that much to figure them out. And most of the referencing that you're going to be doing will be on things like weapon traits, and all of that will be in your personal gang's rules. So the basics in the big rule book, the only thing you really need from that are the skills in terms of referencing, on the tabletop for your gang. So I find that getting by with just the big book is just one of the rule book is perfectly fine. Now, when it comes to the topic of models, this is one of those ones where I think that people come at it from a Warhammer 40,000 perspective, where they expect to be playing at events that may or may not have GW as a sponsor or GW sanctioning. And so they think that you have to buy the models and play with the models that are in the core boxes. But in reality, the truth is that Necromunda is one of the most flexible games when it comes to what models you're playing with. I play with all kinds of stuff. I have, stuff that's 3D printed. I have stuff from other manufacturers. I use tons of North Star military figures, models from Frostgrave in various forms in my gangs. And what's cool about the Frostgrave stuff is they actually have conversion bits for taking the Frostgrave cultists and making them into essentially, Necromunda gangers, scummers, that kind of stuff. It's an interesting juxtaposition with Warhammer 40k, because there is just not a big organized Games Workshop sponsored scene for you to interact with. Even the individual, organized events, like, I happen to run an event at the Nova Open. If you want to bring proxy models or models from other game systems or whatever you want, that's totally allowed, because Necromunda is about forging a narrative, and it's not really about which models you're using, and you can make the rules fit and work with whatever models you want. Still, just for the purposes of keeping track of, everything that we're recording for the costs, we're going to say that this is the cost of models is the $47 that you would spend on purchasing a box of one of the standard gangs. And guess what? This is a topic that comes up all the time. You can build a perfectly fine gang from one of those boxes. The only thing that you might really need is one of the upgrade kits that they sell that offers like extra special weapons and extra close combat weapons and that kind of stuff. Those kits are really nifty because obviously the Necromunda sprues had limited space, and they had to make choices about which weapons got modeled, and so there are things that are missing. So regardless, you can build 1,000 credit list, no problem, using the core box from each of the 6 house gangs, really any of the other gangs. And that's important because people get the impression that just because there's other options that you have to take them. And the funny thing is that in a lot of cases you actually can. For example, in the Van Sar gang, there is a unit called an Archaeotech. Now the Archaeotech is able to take a spider rig or a rad beamer as their weapon, and those come modeled in the kit. But you don't have to take either of them, and if you don't, you could really represent your Archaeotech with any model from the regular Vansar sprue, and all that would matter would be that you had the card filled out and it says what they are and what their stats are. Nobody's going to give you, grief for playing a model that doesn't have those weapons with a model that doesn't have those weapons. They're going to look at it as perfectly fine. So it's a confusing situation to look at when you're trying to figure out exactly what's needed versus what people want. And there's a difference there. People will think that you need to have both sets of models and you need to have your house tactics cards and all that stuff. But the truth is that you don't really need all of it to start the game. And in fact, I don't think it's a great idea to start the game with every single rule and every single possible combination, because it's overwhelming. And the game is not designed around overwhelming the player. The game is meant to be picked up and played and evolved. You're supposed to fight with your gang and earn credits and spend them on expanding and introducing new concepts and new mechanics and new weapons and all that stuff. And that's what's really fun about it, is Necromunda is a system that is vast. There's so much content, but it scales with, what your gang is able to actually access. Because most of the time, starting out, you're not even necessarily going to be able to afford armor for everybody. You're struggling to get, a sidearm on half of your models half the time when you're starting out. So the game creates the impression to a Warhammer 40k player that you need to have all of the rules and all of the options for everything you might want to take. But the reality is that you're probably going to fight your way through an entire campaign before you really find yourself wanting to explore all of the different drugs that are in the Book of Judgment. And the drugs in the Book of Judgment are awesome. Being able to have addicts on your team in a game set in like a dystopian post-apocalyptic is accurate for what happened to Necromunda, but it's not fully descriptive of what happened. But you're looking at this sort of chaotic, dangerous, hellish world. Of course, people are using drugs. That's a basic element of human civilization, and you can play that out on the tabletop in a way that actually affects your games, and that's really cool. But you don't want to start with that. You don't want to start with the full array of every single possible option in the game open to you, because you can't take even a tiny fraction of it. And that's, I think, where the confusion comes from. Even when you're, starting the game, like you're someone like me, who's an arbitrator, who has every single book in the game, who could access every single little stat line, I still start my gangs the same way as everyone else. I buy basic weapons for everybody, and then I come around and I give sidearms until we run out. And then I spend the next several games buying sidearms and hiring a clan chemist, because I want to use crazy drugs on people. Because, of course, that's what the whole thing of being Escher is. So, regardless. So, once you have your rules and your models, of course, you're going to need dice. Now, the dice sets with Necromunda are pricey if you buy them from GW. But the, little secret of Necromunda is that the dice are all D6s. And the only die that you really need that's not easy to just convert into a chart is the scatter die. And let me tell you, you can find scatter die on eBay for about $10. You can get a scatter die and some regular D6s, and you're good to go. And that's all you need to play Necromunda. Because it turns out that you can actually make the ammo dice and the entry dice into a chart. That's right, because they're D6s, you can just convert your D6 score to the various results, and boom, you don't even have to have a separate set of dice. I understand why GW went with the way they did. The dice are faster than having to reference a chart, but this is a completely viable option for getting playing. Tactics cards. Now, this is one of those ones where people will tell you that it's optional, and I don't agree that it is. Strictly speaking, the game references tactics cards in every single mission that you play. It tells you the number of tactics cards that you're going to draw, and it tells you the method in which you draw them. Now, the game is kind of weird in that tactics cards are not included in a deck building format. You don't really have any guidelines for what your tactics cards should be. And as a result, it can be a little confusing when you're approaching the game for the first time to know what tactics cards you need. Well, if you are just looking to get into the game and get playing for as low cost as possible, then I definitely recommend downloading and printing out the tactics cards that Games Workshop already lists on the Warhammer community site. There are 8 cards in there, plus a bespoke card for each of the house gangs, as well as Chaos and Genestealer cults. And it's a solid way to get started. I've also heard of folks using files of the various house tactics cards that are formatted into Magic the Gathering format, but I don't want to link to anything like that because I don't want those folks to get their stuff taken down. One of the other things with tactic cards is that if you are playing the House of books, your tactics cards are actually printed at the back of your book, with the exception of the Ogren Gang. I don't know why the Ogren Gang doesn't have their tactics card printed in their book, but whatever. This is really nifty because it means that you can just skip the tactics cards altogether and just use a dice pool in order to roll your tactics cards out. Now, once you have your tactics cards printed or in your publication, you are going to probably need tokens. Tokens are one of those things where, you could spend $25 on some really nice laser cut acrylic tokens. You could also print out a sheet of printable tokens, which I have linked in the show notes, and glue them to some cardstock and cut them out and have perfectly fine tokens for almost no cost. Or you could potentially do what I have been doing lately, which is that I print all of my cards for my fighters from yaktribe.games, and then I use a pencil to mark when something goes out of ammunition, or when someone takes a flesh wound, or when they go out of action, or whatever, and record it on their card itself. And I find that works really well because the cards are right in front of me, and I would be, putting the token on the card anyway. This, of course, is down to your personal workflow, but I'm going to say that tokens are optional because I strongly recommend printing your fighter cards out from yaktribe.games and doing it that way. And of course, the last thing, and potentially the biggest money pit in all of this, there is the playing surface. You can go absolutely insane building a Necromunda table with the most expensive injection molded plastics possible and all of that, or you can build a Necromunda board out of essentially just garbage that you save from going into your recycling bin. And I know that is, probably not news to a lot of people, but I think that people forget that Necromunda is a game that is meant to be primarily played among friends over a much loved battlefield, and it does not matter whether that battlefield has official plastics in it or is all just soup cans that have been made into a canister, into a big tank in the wilderness or what have you, because ultimately the battlefield is there to be kind of the canvas on which your story is told. And I think that it's important to have a nice immersive looking battlefield. But as you can probably glean from the other series that I'm working on right now, the battlefield on a budget, it doesn't have to break the bank at all. You can do it with some time investment for very, very inexpensive, almost nothing. Even the play surface you can get for as little as just spending $10 on some felt at the craft store or what have you. You can, of course, also spend $25 on XPS expanding foam or $45 on a game mat. But regardless, what we're left with is a landscape where you have a lot of options, and some of them are very, very cheap. Now, when you add all this up, you get something like, it kind of depends on whether you want to buy tactics cards or, whether you want to buy tokens or all that. But at a minimum cost, I would say that getting into Necromunda is going to run right around $150.
Master, aren't you forgetting about the starter set? Isn't it just a little bit more than $150?
Okay, Wally, you have a point. That's a great segue into talking about the starter set. So, Necromunda Hive War is a solid start, but it has some major flaws. Hive War is the most recently released starter set from Necromunda. It came out last year, and we don't yet know whether the Ash Waste box will replace it when it comes out, but it's possible that it will stick around. Hive War is in many ways a great way to get into Necromunda. It includes two full gangs. It has a play surface, terrain, dice, tokens, tactics cards, and rules. And that's everything I listed above, right? So this should be the perfect way to get into the game, right? The answer is kind of. Hive War is a relatively good value when you consider its contents, but there's a bunch of asterisks. First up, the rules. Hive War includes a rulebook and rules for playing all 6 house gangs. That's great, right? It's a cool idea. It means you can get the Hive War box, and you could buy another gang if you don't want to play one of the 2 in the box, and you're able to start gaming out of the box without having to buy anything else. But the rules in this rulebook only include options and prices for what's on the individual gang sprue. This is really limiting in terms of list building. It's not a big deal if you're brand new and it's the only box you have, but it's potentially kind of frustrating if you want to play an actual campaign, because your gang's book is going to be needed to actually get your full rules. And of course, that is compounded by the fact that the rulebook is also not complete. The Hive War rulebook doesn't include a campaign, and instead it has a number of scenarios the players can play in more of a skirmish format. And it's totally fine to start playing the game that way, but it creates a really annoying hiccup, which is that, first off, all the skills that you need that all of the house gangs and all of the other gangs have access to are listed in the back of the hardcover rulebook, which means that you really need that in order to actually play a campaign. And add in the fact that they didn't include Psyker rules and they didn't include the campaign, and you have the situation where you need to buy a duplicate book that duplicates the starter set rulebook that you already have. So suddenly the starter set isn't $170, it's $250, because you're going to need your House of book and you're going to need your core rulebook in order to actually play everything. Now, I think that you could probably find rules for the skills online. You could probably get away with skipping the Dominion campaign. I actually have a campaign that I wrote that I really like for playing in place of a Dominion campaign as your first campaign. I think that Goonhammer has a really fantastic starter campaign as well. So there's definitely options out there, but it's a strange choice to offer this expensive starter set. $170 is a substantial investment, and not have the real rulebook in it. It just strikes me as just not a great decision. And as a result, it kind of makes it so it's a great product for someone who's just getting into the game, but a lot of people, it's not going to scratch that itch. And then, of course, there's the topic of the terrain. Now, the box comes with a bunch of sprues of terrain, and the terrain is incredibly detailed and beautiful. I have used it extensively in my builds, and I could sing its praises for forever. But it doesn't actually cover that large of an area, and you're definitely going to want more. In the case of the board, too, it's only a 24 by 24 sheet, so you're going to need to be buying a battle mat or making a board from foam if you want to expand up to 3x3 games or bigger. So while the starter set coming with terrain is nice in theory, there are many who don't view the Zone Mortalis stuff as being the most efficient way to cover a board, and they would prefer not to invest in that product line at all. So it is a good value if you want everything that's in it. And if you don't, then maybe it isn't. It's a little bit complicated. Regardless, I think that it's clear now from going over everything why people get the misimpression that Necromunda is expensive to get into. I mean, just the fact that the starter set doesn't include a bunch of crucial rules that you're going to wind up playing with eventually is in and of itself, signaling to people that the game is expensive. The fact that people expect that you need to have every single box set or option for your gang, it comes from other game systems. It's not really from playing Necromunda, but it's an understandable misimpression, and I don't hold any against anybody for having that impression. So, as you can see, it's a complicated topic exactly what Necromunda costs to get into. There are a lot of options to save money, but of course everyone's needs are going to be a little bit different. In the end, it's not an expensive game. The important thing is to remember that Necromunda is much closer to a game like Dungeons and Dragons than it is like Warhammer 40,000. It is intended for you to get started, and as you start to feel the limits of the rules that you have, reach out and grab supplements and expand and explore new spaces and new things. And when you treat it as something that you have to buy all of those expansions in order to play, you are kind of setting yourself up to have a bad time. Not just because it's a really expensive proposition to buy, all of those books, but because those books are full of stuff that you're not going to need or want. And so to you, as the person who just invested in them, they feel kind of pointless because you aren't seeking them out at the time where you need them. You're purchasing them all at once. So I understand why people get the idea that the game is expensive. I have a hard time couching it in those terms personally, as someone who used to play Warhammer 40,000. Now I literally wait for a quarterly release. Once every 3 months I drop a bunch of money on Necromunda. It's not even really that expensive, and that's it. I don't have to worry about something getting an update and suddenly needing to dump $500 into an army or what have you. It's just not an issue. In Necromunda, when new books come out, they offer new stuff, and it's fun to explore, and I recommend checking out the various environment rules in Book of Peril and all the drugs in Book of Judgment and what have you, but it's not needed, and when you're just starting out, it's actually going to get in the way. So when it comes to getting into Necromunda, I can say the best approach is to go light and to go easy. And I think that even though it's flawed, the starter set does understand that concept. So I think that I can't fully write it off as a result. In the end, it really comes down to what your needs are as a player and what your playgroup is like. But I just wanted to, put this together and talk about this topic because I think that it's easy to get hyperbolic about what games cost, and it's easy to lose perspective about what people's time and entertainment is worth. Yeah, it's expensive to spend $140 on gaming materials, but renting a movie is often $20 or $30 from a streaming service, and you get that for you get a 2-hour movie for 24 hours and that's it. And it makes you kind of scratch your head like, what is entertainment actually worth on a per hour basis? Is this ever actually worth it? I don't rent movies on digital platforms, so obviously I've made my mind up on that front. But I certainly think that Necromunda is a great value for that investment. You can spend $200 on Necromunda and you can be playing the game for half a decade and never encounter a situation where, you know, you don't have enough. But regardless, I just wanted to put that out there and address this topic, because I think that for a lot of new people, it's hard to know exactly what to do getting into the game. Thanks so much to everybody for listening, and of course, thank you to my wonderful patrons who make this show possible. If you want to support the show on Patreon, you can do so for as little as $5 a month. And of course, if you are interested in Necromunda, check out my podcast, The Dome Runners, over 50 episodes of hard-hitting Necromunda coverage. And that's going to do it for this video, so stay safe and change your paint water.